season 5 of The Wire. We just finished out talking about season 4. So season 5, there's a perfect quote actually from Bunk that perfectly encapsulates not only the show but especially this season, which is from Bunk. As I said, the bigger the lie, the more they believe, which is great. And this is really where we see Jimmy McNulty just completely double down on would you call it Machiavellianism? Like just completely like ends justifying the means.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say Machiavellian, but yeah, definitely he's way more focused on the results of what he's doing than any moral quandaries.
Yeah.
So this season starts off with a time jump. So there's some skip. It's like a year and a half maybe, or just over a year since the last season ended. Carcetti is mayor, and he has siphoned a bunch of the police budget off. Um, and I think he puts
McNulty.
it. No, Carcetti, as the mayor,
Oh.
changes the budget around
Yeah.
so that there's more money in education to stop students from joining the drug gangs. And so the police have less money. The result of that is that McNulty goes off the rails and creates a fake serial killer who kills homeless people so that they'll spend more money on the police so he can directly go after Stanfield.
And the way he does that is he figures out that he can create ligature marks on a corpse post-mortem. So he figures this out from, I believe it was like a former coworker when they're at the morgue examining a body.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, "Oh yeah, like you can just like strangle like a body after it's dead and it looks like that was potentially the cause of death." And he then ties like a ribbon around the homeless people's hands to signify that it's from this like made up serial killer. This is also the season where is it the what is it called? The Baltimore Herald or the Baltimore Sun?
Baltimore Sun,
The
yeah.
Baltimore Sun, yeah. Is another sort of like faction or domain that the show propels into. So it's just fascinating because up to this point we have so many different factions. They're all layered, they're all connected in these various ways, and now we're layering on top of it like this newspaper organization.
Yeah,
Which
which starts to really blur the line of reality with the show because these people are based on real reporters and David Simon's own work himself being a
yeah,
side reporter in Baltimore.
yeah, he literally was. And then you also have Clark Johnson, who the actor Clark Johnson plays a guy named Gus Haynes, and he also is a director of episodes, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I didn't know that, but he's a great character in this. He's like one of the only people at the newspaper who actually like morally stands up for the truth, right?
Yeah.
The pursuit of the truth. Because there's another guy who is this probably my least favorite character of the
Scott
show.
Templeton.
Yeah, Scott Templeton, who is just like this like just picture like milk toast, like in a person, and that's who it is. um, yeah, and I mean, the actor does a great job in this role, but
Yeah,
yeah.
Tom McCarthy, who himself is an Oscar-winning writer and director.
Oh, that guy.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, Tom.
what?
Yeah, he wrote a number of movies.
Wow.
He wrote like Up, like
What?
he wrote some smaller movies called like The Station Agent, The Visitor, Win Win. He wrote and directed Spotlight, which is where he won his awards.
He
Uh,
wrote and directed Spotlight?
yeah,
What?
yeah.
Oh my God.
I think we'll get more into that on after
Holy
we finish
shit.
this, but it just felt, one, just mentioning Scott Templeton, Yeah, so that's part of it. Is this show is
Oh my
filled with
God.
actors who are directors and just the whole show is filled with very creative people operating at the top of their game. And
Wow.
he's just like a side character just in this one season.
I had no idea. Yeah,
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
like just a very contemptible character because he plays this reporter who just fabricates stories. Like he literally is just making stories up in order to get published. And he starts out with like small unverifiable stories in order to like get more like space on the certain page and in order to like climb the ladder within the newspaper, and he starts to see it pay off. And then as the season progresses, more and more people start to realize that he's just a fraud. And Gus was suspicious of it, and then he just outright has evidence that the dude is just making things up.
So then instead he wins a Pulitzer and gets promoted.
The Dickensian aspect.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are some there like the language use in this season is incredible. Like the quotes that they include at the beginning, the quotes that are interspersed throughout. I mean, the Dickensian aspect alone. There's also an episode that's just called Took, which is episode 7. Yeah, it's oh man, it's great. I just wanted to point that out because like, they introduced this newspaper aspect, and as you said, a number of these people literally did work in newspapers or were reporters. So
Hmm.
they make a newsroom that looks exactly as you would imagine it. And I mean, it makes a lot of sense that he did Spotlight
Exactly. Yeah.
because in watching this season, it's impossible for me not to think of Spotlight because of that, and like other newspaper situations such as like Zodiac as well.
Mm,
Like
yeah.
it, and clearly like movies like All the President's Men um
Hmm.
influenced like this sort of aesthetic. Like you just have an open newsroom, like there's no like walls of the cubicles, like you can see everyone's like working and dictating tasks and stuff. But it's really interesting to layer that on top of this show that was like completely about corruption, bureaucracy, drugs, race, and the unbreakable machine. Um, yeah. So let's get into this season. I'm super excited.
Yeah. So Carcetti, the main plot with Carcetti now being the mayor is that he wants to turn his success, which is happening as mayor, into a run for governor of Maryland. And basically, as the as McNulty's efforts to keep faking these homeless serial killings happen, it gets picked up by Scott Templeton, who runs with the story and makes shit up about it, like pretends that he got a call from the killer and is writing all these fictitious stories. So there's like lies within lies, and it all helps fuel Carcetti's popularity because he starts addressing the budgeting problems for the police by re-diverting funds back into that to catch the killer, which, by the way, McNulty's only doing to catch Stanfield, and that he ends up doing with Lester comes back in a big way in the season to do that. Um, but there's some political maneuvering in the background where um, Irvin Burrell, who we've barely talked about, he's like is he the commissioner?
Yeah, he's a contemptible police commissioner.
Yeah,
He's just like he's not incompetent. He's like lazily incompetent. Like he could probably do a reasonable job, but he is just like you could say he's bought and sold, but he literally is just so lazy and useless at his position. Just
yeah. So he gets fired because Carcetti finds out he's doctoring the crime statistics, and they want to replace him with Daniels. And Daniels this whole time is going after Clay Davis, um, the
state senator.
state senator. Yeah, Daniels is going after him. Shit. Yeah, he's going after him because he's just corrupt. Um, and I'm trying to think of the best way to put it all together. Basically, like Carcetti spins all of this together, and it works out for him. And so his entire like run for governor and success as mayor is just built upon lies. Um, Daniels is not able to get Clay Davis by the end, but he does utilize this, like the charges they have against him, for him to reveal who like how Stanfield's lawyer is always getting people off, and it's
Levy.
revealed that Levy's got someone in the courthouse, and there's a huge plot with that where they get really close to putting Levy away, but then Herc tips him off because once again Herc is an idiot, and he tips off Levy that the police know about it, and so he's able to do some maneuvering in the background, and it stops Levy from getting prosecuted because he makes a deal for himself where he has to retire, and then everyone he's trying to represent, like all of the defendants, are basically just incarcerated forever. So they all get huge
Yeah.
sentences.
Herc kind of does that. It's somewhat unclear whether or not he tips him off. Herc actually illegally, by the way, takes the phone number of one of Levy's clients, which is Marlo Stanfield, and he gives that number to I believe it's Carver. It's either Carver or Freeman. It doesn't really matter because it's the same. Like it ends up being the same. Like they use that number to build the wire.
Oh, right. It's not. That's what it is. It's
He
not that he
doesn't.
tips him off about that. He tells Levy directly that basically what they did was an illegal wiretap.
Not quite. Levy pieces it together that the only way that they would have gotten the information so quickly is that they were running an illegal wiretap, which they wouldn't have been able to run a legal wiretap because they wouldn't have had the number. So he figures out that the police were doing something like that is legitimately illegal, but then Rhonda basically like out dick swings him
Yes.
with words and is like, well, if you it's a great scene because he's like, well, Rhonda, you can't just threaten me with like this. And she was like recording, like they have him on record recording him accepting money from someone else. So basically, if he were to implicate Rhonda and the police, he would then implicate himself. And she's like, well, do you want to go to prison for 10 years? Because I'll be out 2 years before you are. And like that's the whole premise of the conversation. So yeah, his hands are tied. Marlo ends up out on the street, but then everyone else in Marlo's crew, yeah, like you said, is locked up, including Cheese, who then gets out.
At the end, yeah. But yeah,
So
meanwhile, so the technicality of it is that McNulty does this alone, tells Bunk. Bunk is disgusted, like hates him. He's like, "What's
yeah,
wrong with you?" So Bunk tells Lester, hoping Lester, being the wizened old man, will come to him and be like, "Don't do this." Instead, Lester comes and he's like, "Let's triple down." So
Lester doesn't love it, but he is like, "Oh yeah, we got the money. Like now we can finally get Marlowe."
exactly.
So he and McNulty like team up on this thing, and there's this. Oh god, there are a few like really off-putting scenes. Like there's one with Bunk and McNulty where McNulty is like shifting this like dead homeless body around, and Bunk is like, "You are some sick. You got some sick shit, man." And like McNulty is like he's not like enjoying it, but like it's odd. And then there's another one where Lester is there, and I believe they took like, oh, what was it? They took like this weird, they took like teeth so they could like nibble on the dead body to make it look like the serial killer, quote unquote, was like nibbling on the dead body. Oh
Hmm.
God, it's crazy. And then on top of that, you have fucking Templeton who's fabricating that he talked to the serial killer on the phone. So then McNulty is investigating this. So he goes there and talks directly to him and is like, so what did he sound like? Because like the dude made up the fact that he talked to the serial killer because the serial killer doesn't even exist. It's just McNulty. So then eventually McNulty actually does get on the phone and he does call I believe it might be Jay. I forget who it is. But yeah,
it sounds right. Yeah,
it's really crazy because you have McNulty who is fabricating this whole thing. Then you have a mirrored character of Templeton who's fabricating this whole thing, and they meet. And then towards the end, McNulty actually reveals to him like he's like, "You sick fuck! Like we're doing the same thing, but like you aren't actually like you're doing it for your own personal gain. I'm actually doing it like to make a difference." It's like kind of sort of what he said. I butchered it, but that's the premise. It's really complicated, but it makes for quite a story.
Oh yeah, yeah. So between that, eventually Lester and somebody else, basically figure out where Stanfield is stashing drugs, and also where Stanfield stashes a huge amount of bodies, because of all of their illegal wiretapping and using these funds, which results in like a big win for the police. But ultimately, the police, via Carcetti, have to cover everything up because it was all illegal, which results in Daniels resigning from being the commissioner because he's like, what the fuck is wrong with you? I'm not covering this up. This is horrible. So that's sort of the end of that plot line. Then there's the Stanfield plot. So Stanfield, by the time the season begins, has basically driven the Barksdale crew out of Baltimore. They're either all in jail or dead or work for him. But he has to do things very covertly, and so Prop Joe helps him to understand laundering money and turning all of this illegal cash into a legitimate way of life, because that's like Prop Joe's specialty. And so once Prop Joe like teaches him all of this, he just immediately has him killed.
Yeah. It's also worth noting that Marlowe gets in contact with the Greek in order to,
and that's why.
Because he figures out the basically where all of the drugs come from. So then he is able to work out a deal with them, to basically take over for Prop Joe. So he sets all of that up in anticipation of killing him, which he does.
Yeah. So Stanfield just outplays like all of the rest of these people. He then Omar hasn't really been in the show for a bit because he like retires and leaves I think he leaves the country, right?
This ain't Aruba, bitch.
Yeah.
It's from Bunk. Bunk says that. Yeah, he leaves the country.
So he kills Omar's like old friend / mentor.
Yeah.
To lure him out, and so Omar comes back with a vengeance and is just shooting up buildings, destroying huge piles of drugs, becoming a problem. And Omar, before he can get to Marlowe, is eventually killed by just like a little kid.
Yeah, this like little punk kid. Like the kid is probably like 9.
Yeah.
Like he's literally 9 and he's like tiny, but he has like a mouth on him and he's like continually like, oh yeah. There's a brutal scene where Michael like beats the shit out of this kid. It's tough, but yeah, that kid ends up just walking into like a bodega where Omar is, and Omar is holding it up, I believe, yeah. And the kid just like shoots him in the head like out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so then that ends that. So Stanfield has basically taken over. What else? He thinks Michael is an informant because he doesn't figure out how the police are finding the bodies and the drug stashes. So he blames Michael, but Michael, having learned how to be a hitman from Chris and Snoop, outwits them, kills Snoop, and then I forget where he goes. He just like becomes he like goes on the run or becomes like his own entity as a drug dealer, kind of like
Yeah,
becoming Omar,
he
basically.
yeah, the show ends by asserting that he becomes Omar because he holds up someone that was working with Marlo Stanfield's crew, and they're like, "Don't you know who I am?" And Michael just like laughs and is like, "Yeah, I know exactly who you are," and just takes all of their money and drugs. But
But the tragic
before he does that, he also takes or he goes with Daquan with his brother Bug to like some
yeah.
aunt's house, and he deposits Bug, his little brother, there to have like a better life than him. But yeah, Daquan, I don't know if you were about to talk about
Yeah, I
him.
was gonna say the tragic part is that while Michael was an enforcer, he was making enough money to keep Dookie Duquan. He goes by all three names. Like he changes from Dookie to Duke, and they also call him Dukan. But yeah, he's like giving him a place to live where he can be safe and without drugs. But then since he has to, kind of go and be on his own, eventually, Duquan just has to go live with drug addicts, which just destroys his life.
Yeah. He basically becomes like young Bubbles, which
Yeah.
is really really tough to see because they do like a wrap up at the end where they show like where everyone ends up, and yeah, it's just him shooting heroin or
Yeah.
preparing to shoot heroin.
Bubbles has a plot this season.
Yes.
What is he doing? He's like living with his sister and he's doing better and he has a story written about him by the Baltimore Sun.
And he turns to his mentor, this like really thin-haired guy, like with a southern accent, who's kind of like his AA. He's his AA sponsor, I believe.
Yeah.
Just a great all-around guy that continually tries to guide Bubs through recovering from not only like drugs but also like Sherrod's death, which he hasn't accepted fully. And in this season, he like stands up in front of the AA and like opens up about that story, which is like one of the most touching moments of the whole show. Um, but yeah, I forget what you were saying. But then the story was written about him by
Mhm.
this like actual reporter at the Baltimore Sun who like writes it about him with his permission. Um, yeah. So that's Bub's thread.
Um, I mean, that's pretty much it. I don't think I went through all the details with McNulty. Like, eventually, McNulty tells Greg's. Greg's tells
Yes.
Daniels.
Yes.
Daniels tells Rhonda Perlman. And Rhonda tells Carcetti, and then Carcetti's like, cover the whole thing up because it's helping me.
Yeah.
That results in Daniels resigning, uh, and eventually, like once it's all said and done, Free Lester and McNulty are basically forced into retirement
Hmm.
because they both broke so many laws.
Which is shown like we haven't made this point, but you mentioned this how like you are forced into complicity in watching this show. So like McNulty is extremely morally dubious, so is Lester, but then you're also like rooting for them,
Yeah,
like in a way, and they are like celebrated as well because they go to Kavanaugh's, this bar, and there's this great scene because like throughout the show like there have been times where cops die or what, and so they will lay a cop out on like a pool table with like their various like items, and they all will like raise a pint and sing like Irish songs together, and it's just like fun revelry. And they do that in this scene, and they just show like a guy's shoes and like everyone around, and they like look like broken up, like clearly someone has died. And Jay is giving like his speech because he's always like the speech giver at like the funeral or whatever. And then it just like continually moves about the room, and then it goes and it's just McNulty on the table, and he's like got a big smile on his face, and they all are just drinking and being animals. And yeah, they are celebrating like McNulty and Freeman's retirement despite them being forced into it because of illicit actions on their part. But yeah, you like they are as I said, not following the law.
Yeah, I mean McNulty like is an alcoholic in the first few seasons and just frequently crashes his car drunk driving.
Yep. Yeah.
But yeah, the show ends on like this big montage where McNulty's like looking out over the city and like there's just all of these intercuts of what's happening where it's like, you know, Michael has become Omar, Chris the crazy psychopathic murderers in jail, Carcetti becomes governor, Haynes the good reporter gets sidelined while Templeton wins a Pulitzer. Lester's just like fishing or something, like he's just happy to be retired. Daniels becomes an attorney. Rhonda Perlman becomes a lawyer, or not a lawyer, a judge.
She's a judge. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who
Bubbles
becomes an
is, like,
attorney?
Daniels.
Oh yeah, he's literally in the courtroom with Perlman, which is like completely not allowed.
No, because they've been sleeping together the whole show.
Yeah.
Bubbles gets like a happy ending.
Thank
where
God.
He's like with his family, but then on top of that, Dookie's just shown doing heroin.
Randy is in the foster care system and like basically becomes hardened by it.
Valchek becomes the commissioner.
Yes, that is
he's an idiot.
That is definitely the hardest pill to swallow.
And what's his name? Rawls becomes the like state superintendent of police
because he did a whole bunch of things for Carcetti and made deals with Carcetti's people.
And Stanfield wins. He's wiped out most of his competition, and the drug trade continues. And it's just sort of shown that Baltimore goes on the same way it was at the beginning of the show.
And Marlo Stanfield also is in the room with the people that Stringer was in the room with, who are like Clay Davis's kind of like cronies, or like the people who have the money, who are basically buying and selling real estate, and are also like kind of laundering money. So Marlo is like dressed in a suit and he's talking with these guys, and it's just like this really nice dinner, right? And then he just leaves because he's just like, he like can't take that. So he goes out on the street and there are just two guys on the corner, and he walks up to them and the dude's like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "Don't you know who I am?" And he's like, "Nah, what's going on?" And the dude tries to pull a gun on him, and Marlo just like takes the gun and kills him. And then the other dude runs away, and he's just got like blood on his face, and he's just smiling on the corner because that's where he belongs in his mind. And yeah, as you said, Baltimore lives on, and the machine churns.
Oh, and worth noting somewhere in there that Cheese, who has now become a despicable villain, he betrays Prop Joe and gets Prop Joe pretty directly killed, if not him pulling the trigger himself. I don't remember that, but he's basically just opposed all of the most interesting characters, and he's like going on this rant about how it's time for the New World Order or whatever. Like he's like, nah, man, fuck Prop Joe. Like it's all about the new one now. It's all about Stanfield. And
he was like, I was with the Barksdale crew, and then I traded up and I was with Prop Joe, and now I'm with the new guy. I'm with Marlo, and it's all about Marlo.
Yeah, so then one of my favorite characters, Slim Charles, who's just like a background enforcer with the he kind of bounces between the gangs, but
really tall guy, like really smooth voice. He's really cool.
Pretty smart. Worked a lot with Prop Joe. He just walks up behind. They're like around like 20 people. He just walks up and executes him in front of this crowd of people, and he's like, that's for Prop Joe. And then they just like, nobody does it. They're like, oh, okay, yeah.
The one guy's like, dude, why'd you do that? I just lost out on like 20 G's or like whatever. And he's like part of the game or something like that. Yeah, that was for Prop Joe.
It's all in the game.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a rather lengthy but fairly story analysis of The Wire.
Now we can finally talk about like what we understand from this show.
Yeah, so it's like obviously we don't ever like this is probably the first time we've been this in depth about the plot of something.
Yeah. But you definitely have to be with this show, because if we just started talking about like Dookie and Herc and like Carver and stuff, like I'm sure people who are listening to this are also just like, dear God, there's just too many names. Like,
oh, especially when you list in a row, like McNulty tells Greggs and Greggs tells Daniels and Daniels tells.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like I don't know who these people are. I don't care who these people are, but
the show does a good job of despite it being complicated, you still understand how all of it works. Like there are a lot of players to a show. Like I'm sure other people have seen shows where you're just like, oh my God, I can't keep track of what's happening. I would say this show does a good job of you being able to keep track because of its like unspooling nature. Like it never is like doing, I think you mentioned this, it's never doing too many things like off screen to the point where you're just like, I don't understand why that happened. Like it shows you how the information.
No, I think it's the opposite. There's a lot that happens off screen, and it's only implied as to what played out.
Yeah, but there is a lot of information that is given that it's not hard to connect the dots.
No, if you're paying attention, but I mention that because like that's kind of what I want to talk about next, is that like how this functions as a TV show. This is a TV in its purest form. Long form storytelling told over a long period of time with time jumps in between, a huge cast of characters, many story arcs, everything interweaves together, but it always feels like one show. Like if you just turn on a random scene of this show, you can tell it's The Wire and not another cop procedural show.
Right. It clearly is doing its own thing. There's also a great marker here as far as like a shot or the way that the camera moves, which is this one. We are actually recording this on video, so this might actually make sense. There's this one way that they do it over and over and over again, which I would say is a motif of the show, where they actually move the camera like to the left and they're like panning, not panning the scene, but they're panning around whatever is shown in front of you. And they do that a number of times. They do it either to the left or the right, but they consistently do that throughout the show. And it's just a cool it's a cool stylistic choice that they have interspersed throughout. But also, yeah, I appreciate the long takes that they have as well.
Yeah,
at least stylistically, but
yeah, ultimately I just think it's important to note that it's not that this show's not entertaining, and we'll get into that in a minute here, but it really does take its subject matter very seriously. And the complications of the characters' interactions and the overarching stories and plots that follow that are not like other TV shows. Even ones, like contemporaries for it. I would say The Sopranos is maybe close to it, but that's because of how much happens off screen in The Sopranos that you have to pick up on.
Close to it in what nature?
Like complication and demanding of your attention. It's not comfort food. TV, by and large, is often comfort food. You don't have to pay attention. It's a blanket you put on so that you feel better.
That's why so many people like The Office, because you can just put The Office on, turn your brain off.
You just hear the nice ringing sound in the background and
Da,
the
da, da,
so
da, 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 da,
right
da,
and
da,
and
da.
the theme song, and you feel good at the end of episodes. Whereas this is kind of like putting rocks in your shoe.
Yeah. Ever so slowly.
Because like my point about the entertainment is like the dialogue is still removed from reality. Like the dialogue is often whimsical, it's punchy, they still make a lot of jokes. There's like techno babble, like police babble. There's still plenty of that in the show that is like rooted in more journalistic reality. Um, but by and large, I mean, there's the stuff about like they're playing chess with each other, and they're like, "You got a pawn can become a queen, motherfucker." And it's all in the game, stuff like that. Trying to think of other like obvious
Dead
examples.
presidents.
Yeah, they do just talk in like nursery rhymes sometimes.
What? Who?
Like Omar.
Oh. Well, Omar, I think, is supposed to be this fantastical, larger than life. So yeah, like you said, um, yeah, that kind of adds to that. Um,
But yeah, like this show isn't for everyone. Um, and I wouldn't recommend this show to everyone. Some people don't have the attention span, not for the length of these episodes, but for the dryness of some of them. Um, if people don't like a show like The Sopranos or Game of Thrones, like if people don't like HBO content in general, they're not going to like this. Um, if they don't want to keep track of characters and where they are, if you just want something that is going to make you feel better, don't watch this. You know, if you want to put your head in the sand, that's fine. You know, you can ignore
reality.
a brilliant takedown of the machine that is law enforcement and
Law
politics. That
enforcement, politics, and the education system.
because the show is very much about how this is not unique to Baltimore.
Yes.
Like this may be in Baltimore, but this is an American cultural problem. Not just a folk, you know, Maryland is not the be all end all of crime in America.
Certainly not. It's also worth noting that they do a great job of showing the diversity of the US through the lens of Baltimore as well. Like I for instance, I didn't know that in Baltimore there were like a bunch of Polish people, or like that Polish, there was like a huge sect of Polish folk in Baltimore. Uh, so yeah, I definitely wanted to mention also that um, I think that this show is a prime example of the German concept Gestalt, which basically means that it whatever it is greater than the sum of its parts, which is loosely what that translates to. And I think that if you just take many steps back from the show and approach the entire thing as one piece, it is very clearly uh, that much greater than like each episode or each character, or the different domains that it explores. And for anyone unfamiliar with Gestalt or how that works, I would probably liken it to like looking at a painting. And do you have a painting around?
Yeah, but this one is a particularly bad example of Gestalt.
I
So
have the like sister painting of that. Oh, I'm not talking about the yeah, not, maybe I'm thinking of a different one. I can see the deer one that you have, and I have the other
no,
deer one.
not that
You're
one.
you're talking about
The Bosch one.
Hieronymus Bosch. But anyway, a painting is an example of Gestalt because like you see each of the brush strokes and you see the different colors, right? But then like it's impossible for a human to not see like what the painting itself is, and the sum of its parts is greater than each individual brush stroke. It's also similar to a sports team, right? You have your various components of a sports team, right? Take basketball for instance. In basketball, you have your point guard or shooting guard, your center, various other components. Like you could have someone who's like a 3-point shooter, and you have to construct that in a way that they all work together to achieve the end goal, which is just winning or dominating the other team. So yeah, I mean the team, if you will, is greater than like each individual player or each component, and that is very true of The Wire as well. The team of writers, directors, and actors and producers clearly was able to construct something that is very true to life, and also I know you said it's not enjoyable to watch. Like I get what you mean.
I didn't say that. I did not say that. I said it's not strictly entertainment.
It's not entertaining. Yeah. It's not
strictly
entertainment. It's not strictly entertainment. Yeah.
It is entertainment frequently.
But like yes,
it still functions in that way. But
for me, it's definitely very enjoyable because it's calling out all of the problems in what I would deem to be the three biggest pieces of like American culture, like politics, education, and the police force. Like obviously there are other components there as well. Like you have journalism, like the news, as well as crime, right? Like these are all things that are
law enforcers and
lawbreakers.
Yeah.
And the beauty of the show is that it pits the people who are supposed to be the law enforcers against the people who are the law breakers, and both of them are breaking the law.
Yeah. Ultimately, I mean, the part that makes it so depressing is that what it wants to say about like the inherent flaw in this whole system is there's too much incentive for you to be out for personal gain than there is to ever fix or change the machine.
Yeah.
So Carcetti comes in with hope in mind, like he really does want to make a change. Like he's kind of smarmy from the beginning, but like he has some ideals and some principles, and by the beginning of the 5th season those are all gone. At this point now he's willing to do anything it takes to become governor. And that's true for everyone. Like everyone just wants to get to, promote as it is, to the next step, and they'll do anything they can to get there. Or there are characters like Jay who are content where they are, and they will make sure they stay where they are by stomping out anyone who might threaten his position.
A man who literally
like that on every side.
A man who literally just wants to sit in his comfy office chair and look at naked women in a magazine and consume greasy food.
Yeah, he's a huge fat guy. Just eating greasy burgers all day and looking at naked women.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. We talked. I mean, we've been planning this episode for a while, but we talked the one time, and I remember saying that like, oh, this is a prime show of showing like the various systems that are broken, and you were like, no, it's not showing that the system is broken. It's showing that the system is working as it was designed and as it's continually designed, and people are ensuring that the system keeps working this way so that they can either keep climbing or they can stay in their place, as you said. Which, as you said, is disheartening, right?
Yeah, because is it human nature? Is it just using the rule of law? The show doesn't answer that question because that question is so big that to answer it really might make you an idiot. But
I think it is partially blaming the individual, but I think it's also just saying like this is what 21st century life is like in a society that it is so complicated and with all of these different machines and systems in place. With that being said, there are highlights, and I think people should focus on the good that they can do within their position, and the people like it's like that quote that's like, tend to the part of the garden you can reach. Like it's impossible to change the whole garden in one go, or like in one year, right? But it starts with like your own specific part of the garden. It starts with like the people that you come across in your like little sphere of your life, and making those people better, or making your not making your life better, but like improving and striving for that. Like that's ultimately what it's all about. And you're not going to be able to change the entire system in your maybe in your lifetime, but you can at least change like some of the people around you, and you can strive to eventually improving the system, I guess, is what I'm saying. The show doesn't really say that, but that's something that I see after the show.
The show's like intentional positivity is that everything we do is cyclical. So any positive action you make or influence that you have on another person will be cyclical in the future. Like it'll still ripple out and be a good force. It's just those are battling against forces that are frequently they seem to be more insurmountable and they seem to be stronger. And I mean that's probably why there's more of a well of negativity, or what we perceive as being a well of negativity in American life now.
But I think that this show is also a great response to those people that are filled with cynicism as well, because it does show the problems, but it's also not saying that it's completely hopeless.
Right, right.
So it's like a great response to just someone who like looks at memes all day and posts those and is just like, the world is just terrible and shite.
Those people would watch this show and then make memes of Omar saying it's all in the game.
The cheese stands alone.
Exactly. What I was gonna say was, like, what I really appreciate about this show is how it differentiates itself from the other police shows. So I know I touched on it earlier, but it's worth a comparison just between, like, there's your standard murder of the week crap, like NCIS, CSI, all of those. There's there's stuff like The Shield, which is far more interesting, but The Shield is so sensational in its attempts to just portray both police brutality and brutality for people that both of those types of shows, The Shield, it's a little less clear, but usually those shows always end with the same message. We need the law. The law is the last thing between us and evil, bad people.
Right.
And without them, you're not safe. And it creates fear. This show is not trying to scare you in that way. Maybe it will if you just don't understand how, like, a city's political structure works from, like, a beat cop up to the mayor, because this kind of gives you a very clear chain of command from one to the other. But it's not trying to do that. It's not trying to make you afraid of what's going on. It's just trying to enlighten you as to what's going on. And I think the other part on top of that is the wastefulness of those procedural cop shows where they, like, it ends happy even though there's just been a murder. It's never like you don't digest the death. This show makes you feel every killing. Like, every character who dies, it's very brutal oftentimes. Like, even when it's just a villain, like, villain. Like, you still feel for them, like, other than a few instances, like, you know, seeing Stringer Bell get gunned down is only satisfying. Having Cheese get shot is like, yep, get that guy out of here. But other than that, and I mean, those are two sort of jutted out examples of it.
I think you're absolutely right about you didn't quite say true to life, but you made a point about the hierarchy as well, and how it's not really trying to scare you, but I also think that it brings awareness to people and their like position and like their way of life and like the shit that they may be dealing with as well. Like for instance, showing all of the people who are working like on the corners or like in the various crews. If you see someone who is like clearly selling drugs like on the street or like resembles Bubs, right, as like being homeless, like it the fact that it's following these people and it gives you that insight as to what their life might be like. It's maybe it's cliche to say like you feel more for those people, and like maybe that's useless. But I personally think that that's a strong feature of the show, is that it makes you think more about the people that you come across in your everyday life. It makes you more aware of their situation, and hopefully it makes you treat them differently or try to help them out in some way, whomever it is. They don't necessarily have to be homeless or drug dealers, but it shines a light on all of the different people in society, and never really is judging them, which I think is a really strong aspect of the show, is that the camera isn't judging. Which
no,
in
the
other
show is very, very objective in its portrayal.
in other shows, like the camera clearly is judging.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really have anything more.
That was just Clay Davis saying "shit" over and over again. Just wanted to throw that in.
I thought you were farting for a second.
Nope,
until
that's
I
what it
realized
sounds
what
like
was
when
happening.
you put them all back to back.
Yeah, I don't have anything more to comment on other than just, yeah, this is quite a forest of trees. It's really complicated. It's beautiful. It's dark at times, but it's very enjoyable, very satisfying to watch and even rewatch.
Yeah, I think in terms of us starting to get, I don't know how many episodes we'll do on TV, but just in covering a TV show, I think this is probably the most important one to begin with, and probably the show I would recommend the most to anyone that I think maybe they haven't seen but have almost certainly heard of.
Absolutely. A lot of people I mentioned this to, they have never heard of this and may never watch it even. But I think it's very valuable.
If this is not your thing, I would recommend How I Met Your Mother. I would recommend the Big Bang Theory. What's some other good ones we got? The Simpsons. There's like 35 seasons of that.
Let's focus on The Wire. I don't have anything more to comment. I think we did it. Till next time, everyone.
Adios.
Take care, everyone.